The receipt that changed everything. Liam O'Connor had always been a man of the sea. His family emigrated from County Cork to Springfield, Missouri when he was 12, a shock to his system, trading the Atlantic spray for landlocked plains. But Liam wasn't one to complain. He'd inherited his mother's resilience and his father's quiet determination. At 16, desperate for a connection to his Irish roots and hungry for adventure, he joined the Navy. 20 years later, he was first-class petty officer, respected by his crew, decorated for his service, and as steady as they come. He'd survived storms that tested his faith, mishaps that could have ended him, and the grinding monotony of military life that wore down lesser men. And he'd never forgotten Siobhan. They'd met in the hallways of Kickapoo High School, a girl with her mother's dark curls and a laugh that reminded him of home. She was the only person who asked about his accent, about Cork, about the family he missed. While his classmates were cruel about his difference, Siobhan was kind. They dated on and off through college. She stayed in Missouri, went to Missouri State University, and became a teacher. He deployed, wrote letters, and called from whatever port he could. The distance nearly broke them twice. But somehow, they always found their way back. At 38, Liam stood in the administrative office of Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, where he'd been stationed for the last 3 years. He'd just finished his shift on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Life was good. He pulled out the velvet box from his jacket pocket and opened it one more time, letting the fluorescent lights catch the diamond. Next month, he'd propose at the Missouri River overlook where they'd had their first kiss as teenagers. The wedding would be in June at their favorite church in Springfield. Her mother was already planning the reception. His father, now 75, had tears in his eyes when Liam told him. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd hoped for during those long years at sea, it was finally coming true. The duty officer needed a receipt for supplies. It was the kind of small task that kept ships and stations running smoothly. Liam walked to the supply office, printed what was needed on the thermal printer, and grabbed the paper fresh from the machine. He was thinking about where to propose, whether the overlook would be cold in May, when he crumpled the receipt and tossed it into the trash without a second thought. His hands had been bare. The thermal paper contained chemicals, specifically bisphenol A, BPA, one of the most widely used compounds in thermal receipt paper worldwide. When you handle the paper with unprotected skin, the BPA transfers directly into your body. Liam's single brief contact was minimal. But over the following weeks, more receipts, more transactions, more everyday papers. A credit card receipt at dinner, a gas station pump, a pharmacy printout for his allergy medication. The accumulation was insidious because it was invisible. At first, he didn't notice anything wrong. A slight rash on his hands. He attributed it to the salt air. Then came the headaches, pressure behind his eyes that ibuprofen barely touched. He was still sleeping well, still eating well, still jogging 3 miles every morning. The changes crept in like tide coming in, subtle, persistent, inevitable. The first sign of something serious came at work. Liam was reviewing supply logs when he felt it. A sharp, electrical sensation that ran from his hand up his arm. His fingers tingled. He shook it off and kept working. 3 days later, he couldn't button his shirt. His hands had begun to swell. Not dramatically, but noticeably enough that his watch no longer fit properly, and holding a pen hurt. He booked an appointment with the naval medical officer, expecting dermatitis, maybe carpal tunnel. The doctor was puzzled. Blood work came back strange, markers elevated that shouldn't be. The rash spread. His hands became painful, then his wrists, then his shoulders. Within 6 weeks, Liam could barely raise his arms above his chest. The diagnosis came in March, delivered in a small office with gray walls and a window facing the parking lot. Early onset inflammatory arthritis, likely triggered by prolonged chemical exposure and exacerbated by whatever he'd been in contact with. The doctor couldn't say exactly what caused it. Liam thought of the thermal receipts, but by then he'd touched thousands. How bad? Liam asked. The rheumatologist was honest. Progressive. We can manage pain with medication, physical therapy, but the damage, you'll likely lose significant mobility in your hands over time. The Navy will probably medically discharge you within a year, possibly sooner. The words didn't register at first. His career, the only thing that had kept him anchored after his parents struggled, after the loneliness of being different in a new country, was ending. 30 years of service, cut short not by enemy action or storm, but by a receipt. He didn't tell Siobhan right away. He was still in denial himself, still thinking maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe this would be manageable. Maybe he could keep his commission, keep his routine, keep the life he'd carefully constructed. But the pain got worse. His hands became nearly useless by April. The Navy processed his medical discharge in May. No combat injury, no dramatic story, just an administrative file closed on a soldier no longer fit for duty. Siobhan came to Norfolk when she heard him crying on the phone. She found him in his apartment, his hands wrapped in ice, empty bottles of pain medication on the counter. The engagement ring was still in his jacket pocket. He'd lost his courage to propose. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Because I'm not the man you agreed to marry," he said. "I'm not the man who came home from the sea. I'm broken, and I don't know how to fix it." She sat beside him on the couch, careful not to jostle his hands, and she wept, not in anger, but in grief for the life they'd imagined, the wedding they'd planned, the future they'd promised each other. But Siobhan O'Connor was an Irish teacher's daughter, and she came from stock that knew sorrow. Over the following days, her shock transformed into something steelier. She called her mother. She called Liam's father. She did research. She discovered that Liam wasn't the first. Countless healthcare workers, cashiers, sailors, and ordinary people had been sickened by thermal receipt paper. The industry had been warned for years. BPA was known to be absorbed through skin. Studies had been published, and still, the papers were printed without warning labels, without protective measures, without accountability. "This isn't your fault," she told him, over and over. "This is someone else's negligence, and we're going to find out who's responsible." For the first time in weeks, Liam felt something besides despair. He felt anger. Liam's parents came to Norfolk. His father, Declan, now gray and slower but no less fierce, walked into that apartment and looked at his son's swollen hands with the kind of pain only a parent can bear. His mother, Mary, had never stopped cooking, even after 50 years in America. She prepared meals with her hands, wishing she could heal him the way she'd healed scraped knees and heartbreak when he was young. "We'll figure this out," his father said simply. It was the O'Connor way, not to promise everything would be fine, but to promise you wouldn't face it alone. Siobhan's mother drove up from Springfield. She brought her daughter's favorite photographs from high school, images of two kids in love against the backdrop of Missouri autumn. She looked at Liam's hands and said, "We don't give up on the people we love in this family. We fight alongside them." It was Siobhan's mother who suggested talking to the media. It was Liam's father who suggested contacting lawyers. It was Mary O'Connor who suggested doing both. They started documenting everything: medical records, thermal receipt purchase orders, research studies, other victim stories. Liam began writing op-eds about the dangers of BPA in thermal paper. Siobhan contacted journalists. They gave interviews. One story was picked up by a naval affairs reporter, then a health reporter, then a consumer protection advocate. The story captured people's attention because it was simple and devastating. A decorated sailor, medically discharged, his life trajectory altered forever, all because someone handling a thermal receipt without gloves had been exposed to a chemical the industry had known was dangerous for years. During the worst months, when the pain was constant and the anger exhausting, Liam's father sat with him on the apartment balcony overlooking the harbor. "You know what I learned when we first came to America?" Declan said. "That loss doesn't mean the story is over. It means it's changing shape." "I was supposed to propose next month," Liam said. "You still can," his father replied. Liam laughed bitterly. "I can barely hold her hand." "Then you hold it carefully," his father said. "Your mother and I got married knowing I might lose my job. Every working man does. We made promises anyway, not because everything would be perfect, but because some things are worth the risk of imperfection." 2 weeks later, Liam proposed, not at the Overlook, but in the teaching kitchen where Siobhan supervised her high school students. She said yes immediately, and the students applauded. She held his hands, still swollen, still painful, and kissed him without hesitation. "That's love," one of the students whispered to another. "Real love." His mother began teaching young sailors about thermal receipt safety. She created pamphlets in her careful handwriting. She spoke at naval bases about BPA exposure. She always began the same way. "My son is a good man who did his job well. His hurt came from something small, something ordinary. Please protect yourselves." The Navy eventually issued guidelines about handling thermal receipts. Wear gloves. The rule was simple. The prevention was simple. But it took a young sailor's life being torn apart to make it official policy. 2 years later, Liam O'Connor married Siobhan at their church in Springfield. His hands were worse by then. He'd lost most of the fine motor control in his right hand, and his left was weak. He couldn't tie his own tie, so his father did it, the same way Declan had tied Liam's tie for his high school formal, decades ago. The wedding was smaller than they'd originally planned, but more beautiful for it. The reception was held in a hall decorated with photographs of the Irish countryside and the Missouri landscape side by side. His father gave a toast that made everyone cry. Liam always wanted to be a sailor, Declan said, his voice thick. And he was a fine one. But he's more than his work. He's a son who stayed true to his roots. He's a man who worked his way up through honor and service. And he's a man who loves my daughter-in-law truly and deeply. That's what matters. Not the seas you sail, but the people you come home to. Siobhan became an advocate for occupational health. She pushed for legislation requiring warnings on thermal paper. Several states began requiring it. The military updated its safety protocols. It wasn't everything Liam wanted. He wanted his career back, wanted his hands to work properly again, but it was something. It meant others might be spared. The pain never truly left him. On bad days, he still couldn't hold a pencil. But physical therapy, medication, and sheer stubborn determination helped him regain some function. He and Siobhan didn't have the big, active life they'd imagined. But they built a different life, no less full of meaning. Liam became a speaker at naval academies and training facilities. He talked to young sailors about occupational safety, about the invisible hazards in everyday work. He held up his hands, still scarred and stiff, and told his story. I worked my way up through the ranks because I believed in discipline, he'd say. And discipline includes protecting your body. Wear your gloves. Always. The 5 seconds it takes to put them on might save 30 years of your life. Every young sailor he spoke to left with two things: an understanding of the real dangers in their work and a belief in the power of persistence through pain. They saw a man whose dreams had been altered but not destroyed, whose love had survived disappointment, whose family had stood beside him. 10 years after his discharge, Liam wrote a letter that was distributed to thousands of naval personnel. It began simply, "My name is First Class Petty Officer Liam O'Connor. A thermal receipt cost me my career, but it didn't cost me my life. I'm sharing my story because your small choice today, putting on gloves, might save your tomorrow." He wrote about the pain, yes, but he also wrote about his wife, who chose to stay, his parents, who flew across the country to sit beside him, his community, which rallied around him, the small kindnesses of strangers who read his story and began advocating for change. He wrote about Missouri autumn and Irish rain, about finding home in a person instead of a place. He wrote about how loss teaches you what matters. And he wrote about gloves. The smallest act of self-protection is sometimes the most important one, he concluded. Protect your hands, protect your future, and know that if you're ever hurt, your family, your community, and your brothers and sisters in service are there to lift you up. The letter was printed on regular paper, not thermal. It was copied thousands of times and posted in every naval facility. And young sailors, reading the words of a man who'd given his life to the sea, finally understood why their commanding officers insisted they wear gloves. Because every person's story matters, and every person deserves to come home. This story, while fictional, reflects a genuine concern. Bisphenol A, BPA, in thermal receipt paper is absorbed through the skin and accumulates in the body over time. Studies have linked BPA exposure to hormonal disruption, developmental problems, and other health issues. If you handle thermal receipts regularly, whether you're in retail, food service, healthcare, or any other field, simple protective measures can reduce your exposure significantly. Wear gloves when handling thermal paper. Wash your hands after contact with receipts. Choose paperless receipts when possible. Avoid touching your face after handling thermal paper for those in the military and maritime industries, where receipt handling is frequent. These precautions are especially important. Your hands, your health, your future, they're all worth protecting. I've written a story for you that weaves together all the elements you requested. The emotional journey of Liam O'Connor, an Irish-descended sailor who worked his way up through the Navy ranks. His steadfast love for his high school sweetheart, Siobhan. His family's emigration from Ireland to Missouri, and the devastating, invisible damage caused by handling thermal receipts without gloves. The story explores several layers, designed to resonate with young sailors and the public because it portrays real consequences, genuine love, and practical solutions. It honors the dignity of service while holding systems accountable. If you like the story, comment, like, and share for more interesting stories.